Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Cal Haney to talk about phone calls and donors. Cal, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'm really excited to be with you here today.
So, to start, I was hoping you could share your superhero origin story.
Sure. I have a background. My origin is I was a theater director, and I moved to New York 2 weeks after I graduated from college. I'm American. And I was working for a theater that I fell in love with. So, what I found out very quickly is that I was really passionate about new plays. And I read a play that I felt should move to Broadway and win the Pulitzer, all the big awards. And so I decided to stay in New York. And I actually got to work on that show and got to know the director, subsequently was his associate, and the playwright and the actors. And it was a play called Doubt by John Patrick Shanley that then was made into a movie with Meryl Streep and the late Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I just loved being a little fish in the biggest pond. And I needed to do something to make money. It won't come as a surprise to any of your listeners, but theater directors need to do something to supplement their income. So I started fundraising over the phone for this theater. And it was awesome. It's Manhattan Theater Club in New York City, like I said, and I raised something like $6 million in less than 8 years, predominantly in gifts of $2,000 and under. And I didn't have a background in sales or in fundraising, but I was talking about my favorite thing. So I've subsequently figured out how to reverse engineer that and how to train other people to be able to connect with community members over the phone about organizations, not for profits, that there's a mutual admiration and connection to.
So, my first reaction is, what year was this? Because
I know, right? Yeah, it was 20 years ago. It was 2025. So yeah, I mean, who would have thought? I This is before iPhones, Alex. We didn't even have iPhones yet. And as we started to have iPhones, I was like, oh, if every year, and part of that is theater. Part of that is like everybody's always like the theater is dying, the theater is in trouble. So there's this like slightly antiquated nature to being in theater, period. So being on phone calls, that was definitely part of it in a larger sense. And every year for a very long time, I did think, okay, this is it. Like people aren't going to pick up their phones anymore. But what's fascinating is that, again, who knows where we'll be in another 20 years, but the fact that so much of our lives revolves around these little computers in our pockets that do coincidentally also still make phone calls, that's really what does keep it going. So the contact rate has lowered. I mean, I'll be very honest about that since when I first started making these calls. But people of all ages actually end up answering the calls. And as they get comfortable knowing that they're going to be hearing from these organizations, they're more and more likely to actually pick up. So part of it is that you and have a phone call starts and it's like, I never pick up my phone or I never quote unquote take these kinds of calls. But the thing is that what I do and how I train and coach people that's different is that I only predominantly work with artists, number one, and that there has to be some kind of connection already that exists between the fundraiser who's making these calls. And this is obviously also internal fundraisers make these calls too. I'm talking specifically if there's some kind of outbound fundraising and an additional group that you've got making these calls. But you wouldn't believe how much you hear. I never pick up these calls. I never pick up my phone, period. And it just happens to be that synchronistic moment that it happens that then builds a habit so that that community member does pick up when these organizations call.
okay, you threw a lot of information in there, and I'm going to have to break that down.
It's fun.
So, yeah, 20 years ago, I totally get phone calls were still a
Yeah.
predominant thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we were using brick phones, if anything, and we had home phones for the most part, landlines.
Yeah.
So you're saying 20 years, even today, in 2025,
Mhm.
people still answer the phone? Like, really?
Yeah, they do. They do. Well, what's interesting is that there's a lot of it's more now about the multi-channel communication. So I will say last year, I remember distinctly when I was in my car and I was not answering my phone. I was driving and a doctor's office called and I saw this transcription come up on my iPhone for the first time of the voicemail as it was happening. And I was like, this is brilliant. This is going to help so much. So there's that. There's this idea of if somebody doesn't answer the phone, I recommend leaving a voicemail. I think about voicemails as being akin to a handwritten note, even on an appeal letter. So you leave the voicemail. And then what I recommend is that you're very specific in your ask on the phone call. So again, I recommend, regardless, Alex, that the people that a not-for-profit actually spends the time, energy, and the human resources to make the calls. I recommend that these are folks that already have a connection to your organization. This is not the moment to work on cold calls or even weaker ties. This is the moment to connect with that person who's already donated, who's already attended an event. This is the moment to make that connection with them, number one. So when you're leaving these voicemails, I recommend being really specific about what you're asking for, why you're asking now, and sharing specific numerical amounts. So how much you're trying to raise, how much you're specifically asking of this person, also saying how you recommend that they make the gift, and then say, I'll also put all this. I just left a lot of information on your voicemail. I'll also put this in an email. So that means that the same day, they're getting both an email and they're getting a voicemail from your organization. And you would be shocked at the percentage of people that actually follow that specific directive when we're asked.
Okay, again, I'm still breaking all this down, digesting all of this.
Sure.
So one key element you mentioned is you have to, or you recommend having an existing relationship with that donor. If you're
Hmm.
making a phone call from a organization, right, the caller will receive the caller ID and recognize,
Sure.
hopefully recognize it as your organization. But if you're
Yes.
working from home
Hmm.
with a nonprofit, I mean, they'll see your local number.
Hmm.
I don't personally answer any phone calls anymore from numbers I don't recognize or doesn't have a caller ID that's not like government of a government call
Sure.
kind of thing.
Sure.
So
Sure.
is there a ways of like, is that okay? Is there any reason to encourage people to go into the office to make these kinds of calls to be able to have that caller ID and that trace? Or do these things
Hmm.
normally work regardless of where you are and you can call from, wherever you are on your phone?
I love talking to someone from a tech side of things. No one
Mm,
ever asks me that question on podcast. Yes, so I do think as I'm working with new clients, what we want to obviously do the best case scenario is that the phone number shows up, that it's from the organization. So most of the orgs that I work with do have some kind of hybrid situation already set up, and that is already part of their IT package. So they've got some kind of external phone system, some kind of app, whatnot, that people can use on their cell phones. So if they're not in the office, it actually is about having some kind of app that lets them call and have it show up as the number, not your personal number.
okay. And
Yeah.
then
So that's actually key. Like that's like a
it
tool.
is. It is because unknown
Yeah.
numbers, I think, there's so many spam calls, robot calls, and stuff like that. You don't want to be.
100%. Yeah. And part of this is that, and the way I train is that as soon as the other person picks up the phone, to be really candid and very front footed about who you are, what your title is at the organization, thanking that person specifically for how they've been involved in the past, and also being really clear about why you're calling right now, because we've all got that, 3-second rule in our head. We're all always trying to like sort what's happening here, right? And so we're like, oh, I'm in Trader Joe's and I'm picking up this call. Again, very American, I'm in Trader Joe's. But you pick up the phone call and you're like, oh, who is this person? Why are they calling me? And if suddenly you're speaking to somebody who is super informed, very enthusiastic, or at least mildly enthusiastic, but is like excited about what they're talking about, you very quickly are like, oh, okay, I'm actually talking to a person. So, what I'm like, the core of what I do, frankly, is about making micro connections between individuals. So, I want both the fundraiser who's making the call and the community member whom we're calling to hang up the phone and have a better day, frankly. Like I want both of them to that night, be having dinner with a loved one and to say, I ended up on a call today that was so unexpected and it was so amazing. So I want it to feel synchronistic, like the person that you're behind at a farmer's market that you end up having a conversation with, or you're at a concert and you end up talking to somebody who's there, or on an airplane. Like I want it to feel like that, like micro connection. And it's really exciting when it happens.
I agree. I know exactly that sentiment when you have just a casual conversation, unexpected for sure, and it just
Yeah.
brightens your day for just even for 5 minutes,
Yes.
or not, or if
Yes.
not 5 hours. But I mean, it's a wonderful
Totally.
feeling if you can experience that and experience that, more often than not.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a script for both when the person answers and when they don't answer. Could you maybe share some insights about each one of those? I know you started talking about it, but if you could just separate the two, as you're saying they're basically the same thing, whether they answer or not, or do you have a different script that you recommend if you're leaving a voicemail versus actually getting a real person?
I'm getting into semantics a little bit here, but I actually think about it as messaging, not as scripts. I think scripts are for actors, they're not for
Mm,
fundraisers. And I think what happens is we want to have the answers. So frequently organizations say, okay, well, what's your script? Give me your script. And I think to myself, you're not actually cultivating an environment, a moment for genuine connection if one person in the conversation has the script and the other person does not, because then that person who has the script, the fundraiser, is trying really hard to stay on script, stay on track. It's probably a little bit more formal, a little more buttoned up, and isn't as present and open to the conversation that they're having. So, what I teach instead is I have a 5 minute fundraising ask framework. It's basically, I like to think about the phone call as a tent, and not the kind that you take camping, but the kind that you might have a graduation party under, or a reunion, or in my case, our very DIY wedding in Maine. We had it under a tent. And I like the idea that it's like calling in community, and that tents don't have doors, don't have windows. People come and go as they please. And we can also move tents so we can have different conversations and different moments. And so I teach 4 tent poles. So basically, there's like 4 moments in the call that you're going to want to make sure you reach. And so, other than that, it gives the person making the call, the fundraiser, the space to go on natural tributaries, like we do in natural conversation. So that idea to not be like, oh, if you don't have to stay on script. So for me personally, if I hear a dog barking, I love dogs. I can't help but say, oh, I hear your dog. What kind of dog do you have? I want to know about their dog. And so like I will take a little tributary to find out about their dog, because I always want to talk about dogs. So it's also finding what feels like truly like the genuine connection points in the calls. So there is what I would say. So I do have the methodology of if somebody picks up the phone and you've got those 4 tent poles. I do recommend a more condensed version if you do get somebody's voicemail. So that is something that I would recommend kind of jotting out, just not like a script, but like some messaging of like, okay, I want to make sure I say this, this, and this, that there's like particular bullet points that you're going to leave on the voicemail. And it will be a long voicemail. Again, that's kind of the antiquated intention of it, is that, oh, I just left you a super long voicemail. Again, I don't know if they listen to it. Now that we've got transcriptions, people can just skim it. And also, they're going to get an email that's going to have the same information that will reference. You're going to, in the voicemail, reference. I'm also going to send you an email. I just left you the longest voicemail. Thank you if you're listening. I'm also going to send you an email as well with all this information. And then the email will say, I just left you a super lengthy voicemail. Here's all the information that you need to know. And you can obviously call me back if you want. And if not, here's the way you can donate if you want to do that on your own.
okay, so first of all, what caught my attention was this 5 minute ask framework. What can you
Sure.
actually accomplish in 5 minutes?
Everything. You can build relationship. You can learn things that this organization had no idea was going on with this particular community member. And you can secure a donation. I mean, I've seen it all. It's pretty amazing. So what I tend to do is I recommend that these phone calls work specifically well for mid-level giving. So predominantly, I'd say most organizations, that's a 4-digit gift. So between 1,000 and right under 10,000 for most organizations. So you want to make sure that you're spending your time and your resources wisely. So there does need to be a strong return on investment component to all of this. And mid-level is the sweet spot. So these are folks that you don't necessarily have the time, energy, resources, nor is it necessarily appropriate to be setting these community members up that they're going to have the experience with your org, that they're going to get to have a meal or even a coffee one-on-one on an annual, biannual basis with you, but they need something else than what you can do with even like the best emails and the most like highly targeted, segmented email basis. Like you learn more when you actually talk to a person. So that's why this works specifically well for mid-level.
So we're talking about, so 5 minutes. I'm talking about like actual call length or just to
Yep.
be able to get your foot into the door to continue the conversation that actually ends up being longer.
No, Alex, actual. I mean, you follow what's best for that person, but you can within 5 minutes like truly build some relationship, tell them some things that are happening in your org, find out a little bit more about why they were involved in the first place, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and make the ask and like secure a gift. So it can be both solicitation and stewardship in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I mean,
Yeah.
I get the ask, but even you get the commitment within 5 minutes usually too.
Correct. Hmm.
Wow, okay.
Correct. Hmm.
And then so you said I like the idea, by the way, of not calling it a script, but calling it messaging, because when you
Yep.
started talking about it, it reminded me more of a monologue, a script. Like you have something to say,
Hmm.
you're broadcasting it out. You don't really care what the audience has to say because you have some things to
Yep.
say versus messaging. I agree. It's more like
Yes.
key
Yeah.
points to make sure you
Interactive.
cover.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said there's also four moments in a call to those 10
Uh-huh.
polls. Can you explain what
Hmm.
those four moments are?
Yep. So the first temple number one is the opening. So this is the moment when you are building trust and rapport with the community member. It's the first 15 seconds of the call. So it's about how are you setting up the tone for the rest of the call. The second is tentpole number two, and this is the main event. This is when you're calling the community member further into this organization. So, this is where you're sharing what's happening at your organization right now. So, any recent wins, any new staffing, any events that have happened or that you can invite this person to. And conveniently, the last, whatever you're sharing, the last bullet point you're going to share with them is that you are fundraising right now. And as not for profits, you should be, frankly, fundraising all the time. There should always be some kind of campaign going on. So you talk about your current campaign and craft it into an event. So to say, Alex, we just started making these calls on this campaign. This is our first day we've been making these calls. You're like the first person I'm talking to. Or, Alex, we've had this going on for the last couple of months. And so we're actually in our last 10%. We're trying to raise our last 10,000 of the $100,000. We're trying to do that by the end of this week, if possible. So I'm just sharing the information before I go into tentpole number three, which is the actual ask. So I want to be really clear. Tentpole number two is the main event. And that main event is really about calling that person further into community. The main event is not the ask. And people feel the difference in terms of relationship building versus a transactional encounter. To say, I'm here to let you know a little bit more about our organization, find out what's working for you, what's not working for you, how are you connected, how do you want to be connected, educate them on the organization, get them excited. Also, we're fundraising. That all happens before I then turn to you. And in tentpole number three, say, Alex, you're so great to be on the call with me. Like I said, we're just in our spring fundraiser right now. We're working on our last 10%, $10,000. You were so lovely. And back around Giving Tuesday, it looks like you did a gift of 2,000. I'm just going to shoot for the moon and see if, because we're on this campaign right now, you'd be game to do 2,500 with me today.
Hmm.
So it's been set up for a while. We've been on the phone for probably 2.5, 3 minutes at that point. That I started the call. I know I didn't get into that right now, but I would have started the call with thanking you for that donation that you made around Giving Tuesday of $2,000. Say, like, we'd love to get you more involved. And we'd also love for you to know a little bit more about what's happening here. So there's never a bait and switch. It's always very transparent about what this call can be and the expansiveness that can be this call. And then tentpole number four is the closing. And so this is when you're going to offer gratitude to this community member, whether they donated today or not. They stayed on the phone with you. We're all trying to find what is everybody's good stretch. Maybe just keeping you on the call would be the good stretch, whether you donate right now or not. And we're also going to share in that moment when they're going to hear from our organization again, because again, it's about the forest that is the larger relationship building as opposed to the tree that is what happens on this particular call.
I really appreciate the fact that you call out the main event, that point number two is the focus of the call, because I agree when your focus is on the ask, it's easy to be perceived as a salesy type call versus
Yeah.
information first, connection, you said sharing events, sharing staffing wins events, and then asking for the ask by also linking it to something they've already donated to in the past, like and increasing it. It's whatever, I'm sure part of your strategy was whatever the person donated at in the previous time, you want to ask for more than that today. Was that
Yeah.
intentional?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of it is so I really like to practice yoga. And I'm always thinking about a good stretch versus a bad stretch. And so in yoga, it's about curiosity when something feels sticky or challenging. And maybe something feels sticky or challenging in a different way than it did before yesterday or ever. And you're like, oh, that's curious. I've never felt that quite in that way before. Let me breathe into it, see how that feels in a good stretch, but you don't want to like hurt yourself. You don't want to go to injury and like push yourself towards something that there's a difference between discomfort and injury. And so I think about that a lot in terms of these calls. And so for most people, they won't give more if we don't ask them to. So it's about finding what is the good stretch for that person. So I recommend, and this is also why we're always being specific with numbers. So I recommend, like I said, sharing specifically what their last gift has been and thanking them for that. And then saying that I'm going to shoot for the moon and see if you could do Y amount. I would say a blanket, like standard, I recommend shooting for the moon with a 50% increase. Obviously, if there's things that have happened on the call, you find out that, they're in a particular economic hardship, not just the larger what's happening globally right now. But if there's anything that they're saying, like obviously, then this might not be the moment to ask them for more. It might even be a moment to say, I was going to, see if you wanted to get involved. Right now, I understand if this is not the right moment. They might still say yes. We don't know. So it's about acknowledging their given circumstances in the moment. I also recommend not spending a ton of time doing this, but looking back in the CRM and seeing what their history is. So if you can say to them, you're amazing, Alex, I don't know if you know this, but you've been donating for 10 years at this point. Or when I get to the ask, you were so great. Looks like last year, thank you so much for that gift you made of $1,000, $2,000 last year. But I'm looking back and I'm just going to shoot for the moon because it looks like back in 2022, you actually did a $5,000 gift. That's amazing. Is there any way you could match that this year? And then you hear, and like, actually, this year's going okay for me, all things considered. I can, or no way, I can't do that. Or let's stick where we are. So you just learn it. You get to be in a little dance, and it should be a dialogue, to your point, not a monologue, a dialogue. And the more that fundraisers can learn how to be active listeners, and again, this is coming from my theater background, what we always train actors is that you're actively doing something to the other person. So you're not focused on yourself. So that is what I'm always training fundraisers is to be like, how are you in tune with what's happening with the other person? So it takes the onus, takes the pressure, takes the nerves out of it a little bit if we're not focused on ourselves and really just trying to hone in and connect with the other person.
I'm going back to my previous notes because there was so much information back then.
Sure.
Let's go back. So, because I love everything you just said and I agree with it. So, I'm going to jump back to you said leaving a long voicemail.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't get the impression you said it's a little more concise version. It is a bit more scripty because you don't have the interaction anymore.
Hmm.
But do you normally is it normally the same kind of 4 points that you want to make in that voicemail?
Yeah, I think I can just extemporaneously give you an example. So if I was calling you and you didn't pick up, and I'd say, "Hi, Alex. This is Kel Haney. I'm the director of development, executive director, board member, whatnot, of organization XYZ. Wanted to call you first and foremost. Thank you. You were so lovely. You did a gift of $2,000 back around Giving Tuesday. We actually surpassed our end of calendar year goal of 250K. So you were a big part of that. Thank you. Wanted to see, number one, if you saw that we've got our spring gala coming up in May. If you happen to be in town, would love for you to be there on May 12th. But regardless, right now we are finishing up a little start of spring campaign, and we're working on raising $100,000 by the end of the month. We're really excited. We're actually 75% of the way there, halfway through the month. But I was going to just also shoot for the moon and see if this is a moment you may want to get involved philanthropically again. See if there's a world in which you could do 2,500 this time around. So you're welcome to call me. I would love to talk to you and just hear what's going on in your neck of the woods. You can also hop on our website and donate there as well. And thank you for listening, presumably to this very long voicemail. I'm more than happy to also send you an email, so you've got it that way too. And regardless, we'll check in the fall and see how you're doing.
Wow. I love it. It sounds great. Okay. And then the email follow-up, what would you normally put into that? Is it just like paraphrasing everything you just said, or is it verbatim? Like, where would you
I would
want
say
to?
it's paraphrasing. I think what's important, and I mean, it's so funny, right? Like, there's all this data research that shows just making an email look as simple as possible is what people are most likely to read. I'm sure you
Mhm.
could give me all sorts of data points on that. It's similar with these emails. So, this is also interesting because frequently there's a little bit of friction, predominantly with the marketing department, of, well, why are the fundraisers sending out their own emails? We send out all the emails. Why are these other emails going out? And it's important that these emails are as personal as possible. It doesn't have to be a ton of time, but that it is coming, that the subject line is like, just left you a voicemail, or, wanted to like thank you for your gift, see if we could get you involved. Like, you want to write like a little bit more of an informal that feels like person to person subject line. So there's that. And then I would recommend you want it to like I like this anyway with any personal emails I send, but you want a lot of negative space on the page. So you do want it to be like not like long paragraphs, but basically like, hey, I just left you a voicemail. Here's what I said. And like basically bullet points with the specific numerical amount. I will frequently recommend people bold, underline those types of things. Like, just because we got to keep thinking about our audience and that they're looking at this while they're in public transportation or while they're waiting for another meeting to start. Like, we have to realize that people don't read emails, they skim emails. So it's just, I'm sure it's what you're thinking about with your email work all the time, and what we do with our social media posts and whatnot. But I'm always thinking about, like, you don't want to get into too long didn't read as far as the email is concerned. You want that to be like, here's the real concise information, obviously with all of the links where to donate, so that somebody can be actionable, and be really clear that you've got one call to action in this email. And it's funny because I had somebody, a colleague of mine, I don't remember exactly what the example was last week, but he was asking me about a an email he was writing that was a follow up to the voicemail. And he's like, I really want to like offer them a thank you, like go ahead and have them link to like this video we have. And I'm like, that's great. I was like, make that a PS, make that at the very end as like a little gift, as opposed to like, don't mention that immediately, because if you mention that immediately, you're making that the call to action as opposed to the donation. So I do get very specific and strategic with the voice, with the emails as well.
Yeah, totally right. Emails, no one reads emails, they skim them. The
Yep,
only thing people read are books and maybe magazines.
totally.
They
Yeah.
choose to read that versus if they receive something, they're more likely to skim something. Same thing applies
Hmm.
to websites.
Yeah.
In terms of the ask, would you give also, I would imagine, a link to the call, like the call to action has to have a link to the donate page, right? I don't know
Yes.
if you mentioned that part.
Hmm.
And then I can see why all this strategy works well with the mid-market, because you have enough data in your CRM, hopefully it's Salesforce, but in your CRM to
Yeah.
be able to refer back to previous donations. Like if they're a net new donor or they've never donated before, it's very difficult to have
Hmm.
this kind of connection with them. And
Hmm.
of course, if they're major gift donors, it's a whole different ballgame. So I can understand why this strategy seems to work well with mid-level. But
Hmm.
would you say it's only or best suited for mid-level and nothing else? Is there scenarios where on other sides of that fence, there could be some opportunity for this kind of approach?
Absolutely. I see that when organizations see how well being on the phone works for mid level, that starts to work in both directions, towards grassroots and towards major. So sometimes I will say I have seen major gifts come in over these calls. I've personally been the first person to have a conversation with someone who has then within a year become a board member. So this really is also about pipeline towards major gifts. So you see that. And it's interesting because as I'm training the folks in mid level, that kind of trickles up to the rest of the organization. And I yesterday was on the call with a client, and that client was saying that I had actually been hired to train her director of development, and specifically on mid level. And she's the managing director. And she said, but listening to Carter on these calls, it makes me think I need to just get out from sending another email and actually make the call. So she was talking specifically about the follow up to a capital campaign ask. And usually her cadence had been send an email and then send another email. And then maybe if they haven't responded to the second or third email, then to pick up the phone. And instead was like, well, what if I just pick up the phone first first and foremost. And she called it, I don't usually refer to it this way, but like a 1-2 punch of like, I'm going to leave that voicemail if they don't pick up. And then I'm also going to send the email. So I'm watching that. I'm watching major gifts. People get more comfortable with picking up the phone once they see what we're doing with mid. So I see that happening. The other thing you can do, and this is something I'm really excited about with a few of my clients, is getting the rest of the organization and or the board involved with thank you calls. There is no reason that pure thank you calls need to, or frankly, I think should be the development department. That's a great way to engage the rest of the organization, get everybody in touch with their own whys of like, why are they here? What do they love? What are their stories about this organization? And then to hear those stories from their community members as they're calling them to simply make a thank you call. If you do set up a thank you call campaign, the biggest piece of advice I can give though is I recommend never using the phrase, don't worry, I'm not asking you for money, because somebody in your organization, even if it's not you, presumably will be making that call at some point. So you can say, I'm simply calling you right now to say thank you. And I do think that thank you calls are a really great way to just continue to community build, not just with the donor, but with everybody internally in your community. So that works well with phone calls. The other thing you can do, Alex, is if you want to do, especially like in the state side, we can do this, some like very basic donor research to find out what somebody's potential capacity is. So frequently you've got people who are donating $250 or less, and they're donating as a little bit of a test just to see how does the organization respond to them. So frequently there are people who are in your grassroots who are giving for their first time or not with any increase. And what we're really seeing is that those folks actually may have the capacity to give more. So that's something else I do, is like look into who's already in your database and just do like a very simple donor screen. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, just to be like, oh, it looks like we've got some people who potentially have capacity, and make those calls to those folks and see if you can move them into mid level and beyond.
I don't think you've mentioned yet so far is there any particular time of day where these calls are more effective than others?
You know, Before the pandemic, we used to predominantly make these calls at night and like maybe sometimes make them during the day. I will tell you, there is truly no rhyme or reason at this moment. Every time is a bad time for somebody, and every time is a good time for somebody else. So I would recommend, if you live in climates that are only beautiful and warm particular times of the year, Friday afternoons when you're in spring and summer are not the best time to call. But other than that, yeah, you can really experiment a little bit. And I also find, because I predominantly work with artists, it's really about when do they have the time in the rest of their schedules to make these calls. If it's in terms of people who are internal employees, I'm like, you just have to make them, because what happens is people just, unless we have some real accountability set up, they just won't make the calls. These will be the one thing that doesn't happen, that there's always something more pressing in the day, because it's really vulnerable to get on these calls and people avoid it. So I say you have to time block it. So I am more concerned about the individual actually just putting in the time to pick up the phone. I'd recommend an hour to 2 hours at a time, usually, even just an hour just to get started. But that you actually have a time blocked. So if a meeting comes up, if something else comes up, you have to do that. You have to go ahead and move it to a different time in your calendar in the next week. That's the hardest part, is just truly getting people motivated to pick up the phone. So it's less about the time of day and more about actually just doing it. And people will tell you, they'll let you know if it is not a good time. Some people are like, this is perfect, I'm at work. Someone's like, don't ever call me, I'm at work, And so it just, everybody's different. And I will say the tune changes once they understand that this conversation is quality and is truly about connecting to an org that you're already passionate about. People suddenly are more available than they were when they first picked up the phone.
You've kind of alluded that the caller will have, at least at the beginning, a certain level of nervousness making these calls, especially
Mm-hmm.
someone these days who is not used to making calls.
Yeah.
Do you normally recommend some kind of training for them? Like, it's clear that you have passion when you speak, but not
Mm-hmm.
everybody is able to communicate that as easily as you are.
Yeah.
Are
Mm-hmm.
there, aside from taking acting classes, like, is there any way that someone can improve their communication to be able to express things in such a positive way, in a shining way,
Mm-hmm.
radiant way, maybe is a better or even way of saying it,
Mm-hmm.
to make them not only feel more comfortable, but also be able to express what they're trying to express more clearly?
Yeah. Well, part of with the 5 minute fundraising ask framework, I have that set up so that people feel like they've got some guardrails and they've got some structure in terms of having these conversations. So part of it is like how I've designed my training period. Obviously, like, sure, you can hire me, I can come coach you. I'm always happy to do that. But what I would say, like, just on like the very basic level, it's about learning to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to be vulnerable on these calls and that you're not going to be perfect. So that's what's most important is like if you're trying to actually sound perfect, not make mistakes, then you come off sounding robotic, you come off sounding like a scammer, all these things that people are afraid you are on these calls that you're not actually. So it's really about getting comfortable with the fact of sharing with this person where you are. And I actually recommend sharing your own state of being. So like you said, Alex, if there's somebody who is just like, I'm not comfortable making these calls, I actually would say that as part of it. I would actually bring it up. I would say, I have to say, we're starting something new and making calls, and I'm really nervous about it. This is not my comfort zone, but I really love my organization for this reason. So I'm doing it. So, and even saying, like, okay, when you get to the fundraising part of it, like this part, like makes my palms sweat a little bit. Like people want to connect with other people. And that's how we get kindness to come out is like when we are sharing our own vulnerabilities. So that's like the blanket advice. There's a lot more particular coaching, and I get into like mindset stuff. We get into talking about like what is like your familial history, talking about handling money. I mean, this is all part of our each of our own individual psychologies of how we do this. And we can't like solve that or fix that or, set new mindsets all in a day or even in a year or whatnot. But it's just always a work in progress. And so just to get people to understand that they're bringing their own money mindset to these calls, just having people even acknowledge that for themselves is huge.
Yeah, and like anything, it's a practice makes perfect, right? You just need to do it. You're not going to be great the
Yeah.
first time you do it, the first few calls, just like I wasn't great when I was first host of this podcast. But here we are 3 years later, and
Oh,
I'm
I love
hopefully a
it.
bit better. But the
Yeah.
idea is that you just need to do it. Just start, and then you'll improve as you go along.
I'd also say that it's actually that practice makes you your own uniquely, like perfectly imperfect. Like
Mm.
you learn how to share more of yourself because again, it's like I want to hear when I and most of these fundraising rooms, like if it's actually like we're setting them up as like an organization needs to outsource, quote unquote, I actually recommend that we hire artists and that they're the ones making these calls and we actually make them in a Zoom room and they should be local so they can actually like participate in what's happening at your organization. Like just because you're not meeting every day in person, like they should still be as local as possible. So I'll go into these rooms every day, Alex. Right now I have like 5 outbound fundraising clients and I'll listen to them calling, like I'll listen to them on Zoom. And I do that every day. And it's not about the calls I want to record or not the calls I'm like, wow, you sounded so perfect and it was like slick and like you checked all the boxes. Like that's actually not the goal. The goal is like true genuine connection with the other person and getting the other person feeling comfortable enough to genuinely connect with you. So those are the calls that I would love to record. Those are the calls that we're looking to emulate. So and you can't, again, the other person doesn't have your script. The other person, we don't know where we're going to reach them. Like that's kind of the beauty of it. We have no idea what's going to happen on the other end of the phone every time. So you've got to stay really alert to what's happening. So yeah, so there's no, if that's helpful, like there's no perfecting. I always think you can continue to get stronger at these calls. Um, Again, I've been doing this now for like 21 years, and I think about it truly as an art form in a way I never would have thought of that, given how I started as a theater director myself. But it's really beautiful that we just learn how to connect deeper, sooner, faster with people. That's what we can continue to get better at. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I no, totally agree. Thank you for sharing that. What I also want to call out was when you were being very honest about, hands, palms sweating and this and that, there was actually
Hmm.
one key phrase in that sentence that really resonated, and that is, it's because I truly love this organization.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sharing your vulnerability in that sense is great, but you also tied it to a passion, a love.
Hmm.
You're overcoming this fear because you believe in what you're doing and you believe in the
Yeah.
organization. And I think that those 2 points together really make an impact.
Yeah, yeah. Because frequently, I mean, what I will do in training is I will also ask moments when the individual got the quote unquote ick from an ask, from whether it was sales or it was donation based. But like, when did somebody sell you or make a fundraising ask and it felt icky? And let's break down why it felt icky. And most of the time, it's because it's transactional and because you're not feeling heard by the person who's asking you. So it really is about like reminding people you're not calling to like sell them insurance. You're not calling to like, I don't even know, sell them vacuum cleaners or encyclopedias, whatever back in the day people would sell over the phone or door to door. You're inviting this person to make an even more impactful contribution to this organization, if that's in alignment for them today or not. And so it's just about giving that space and offering that opportunity. And so, yeah, and so that's also why we just keep getting back to our why to help us get over the ick in ourselves of making this ask. Well, I'm doing this because I know the impact and I'm so proud of what we're doing and I see what this could be if this is in alignment for you. And so that's the beauty of it. It's like it always feels like we're just trying to find like what's the right fat fit, what's the right match in that moment. And there is, as I'm sure your listeners will know what that feels like, that synchronicity when that person is then thanking you for calling them and asking them and thanking you for like being vulnerable and going out of your comfort zone to ask. Like it's just so beautiful when both people can feel really good about how the call ended.
A lot of human touch in this, of course, a lot of manual work. I'm curious to know,
Yeah.
does AI have any place in this? Can it help in any way? Is there any way that we, a nonprofit can leverage AI to help with this kind of outreach?
Yeah. I think I've got a client that they're actually implementing right now. I don't know which program they're using, but what service, but they actually are using AI to record the calls and transcribe them so that the person on the call doesn't need to be taking notes. So basically, the AI system is going to be set up so that that's just anything pertinent that happens on the call is documented in the CRM. So I think that's a really, really good use.
It does. I guess you can do analysis on it. You can do summaries on it. Supervisors could look at it. If something goes sideways for whatever reason, there's a log for that as well. So that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen. There's I'm sure a lot more questions. I know there's a lot more questions I can ask, but I'm looking at the time. Want to respect your time as well. So maybe you could share how people can get in touch with you if they do have follow-up questions.
Absolutely. So you can hop on my website, kellhaney.com. I've got a place you can just book 30 minutes on my Calendly. If you just want to have a conversation, feel free to do that. I've got some freebies on there. I've got 8 phrases not to use in fundraising and 5 tips that are really specific to mid-level. So you can download those. And then LinkedIn is my social media professional happy place. So feel free to reach out to me there. If this is inspiring you to hop on the phone, I'd love to hear how that goes. Like, feel free to make a call today. I'd love to hear about it. And any questions you have. As you can see, I really like to be in connection and community. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Cal, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.